Welcome. My name is Danielle Despens. I am the CTE School Review Coordinator, and I am super excited to have you join us for the upcoming Comprehensive School Review. Today is the Comprehensive School Review Team Training, where we're going to be talking about your role as a reviewer, as well as giving you some general oversight or overview of the Comprehensive School Review process. Okay, so I want to start just by talking a little bit about the CSR process and why it's important that we engage in this process on a statewide basis. And first off, it's important we acknowledge that this is a peer review process, which is why you folks are joining us on these teams. And what that does is it allows for an opportunity for sharing of ideas. It allows us to capitalize on best practices that are happening throughout the state, and then also learn from one another's mistakes, which helps push us forward both as an institution and as individuals. In addition, this is a self-assessment process, which means the school has been engaging over the past year in preparation for the CSR through self-reflection. So they have all been completing self-studies and then developing evidence. And what that does is it really gives the individuals an opportunity to just kind of pause and to really think about their practices and make sure that what they're doing is aligned with where their intentions are. So a couple of things that I like to always keep in mind, and a couple of questions that I'm always asking myself as I'm moving forward as a reviewer within this process. And one of those is the school meeting the needs of the student? So again, that's extremely important. Our students are our priority. So making sure that we are designing our programs and our schools in a way that really lifts those students up, that provides the best possible access to the learning, and really meets the needs of the students. And then number two is, are the instructors and administrators receiving the support they need to be successful? So as a state, are we providing the administrators the best level of support and information and professional development necessary for them to be successful? Is the administrators providing their instructors the kind of level of support and professional development that they need in order to progress forward on their career path? And what that does is by providing that level of support needed for success, those instructors are then able to transfer that down to those programs and to those students. And then, are the schools and programs meeting the goals that they themselves are setting for themselves? It's important that you understand what your role as a reviewer is. So I want to make sure that we are highlighting some of those key responsibilities that you're going to be asked to take on once you get on site. Each of these are going to be highlighted, and we're going to go over more in depth once we move forward with the presentation, but I do just want to acknowledge them up front. So first off, we will be asking that you review and confirm information provided, which essentially is looking at the information that they have provided due to that self-reflection process that they've been on. So over the course of the past year, they've been completing self-studies and developing evidence for us. So for each of your section areas, we will be asking you to review those materials to make sure what they're telling us they're doing is in fact what they are doing. Also, you'll be completing a few interviews while you're on site. And again, based on the section area that you are specifically assigned, you'll either be meeting with instructors or administrators, whoever is appropriate for that subject area. And then we're going to be asking you to actually do the writing of the review section for your area of focus. And I'm going to be going through quite a bit of how do you do that writing and how do we stay consistent within that writing process in a moment. And then you're going to be providing feedback to the team. So we're going to spend a significant amount of time in our group space doing group shares, where we're going to be talking about what our experience is and has been over the course of the past couple of days, and what our findings are and what has resulted from the discovery period that we've been going through. It's important you understand what benefits are afforded to you as a reviewer and what we offer you in order to help support your experience as a reviewer. So first off, you will be receiving professional development hours. Typically for a review, you will be receiving about 20 professional development hours, and those are sent to you in the form of a certification of completion about a week or so after we left that site. We do believe that this is an excellent opportunity for personal growth. I'll be honest with you, I have never left a CSR without having learned something new about CTE or about my role within that CTE space. We also do lodging and provide that lodging. So I have already reserved hotel rooms for everybody that has requested one. So if you need a hotel room and you have not already let me know that, please let me know immediately. That way I can make sure you're set up for day one. We also do mileage and tolls. That mileage is calculated from the moment you leave your home and start heading towards the CTE that we'll be working with. And then when you arrive back home 3 or 4 days later, depending on the size of the review. In addition, those tolls, it's important to acknowledge that anything over $10 for tolls in one expense form, you will be required to provide receipts. So you want to make sure that you're considering that so that you're getting those receipts as you move along your path of travel. Food allowance, we do provide a meal allowance, and that's a flat rate per meal. So you can see that daily travel allotment down at the bottom. We do adhere to the national per diem rates. So breakfast is $16, lunch is $19, dinner is $26, and then we also provide an incidental expense of $5 just in case something comes up per day. We will be getting lunches provided to us by the CTE on day 2 and day 3. However, day 1 is considered a travel day, which means we're not actually arriving to the school until about midday. So we do ask that you eat prior to arriving on site because once we get there, it's kind of hot and heavy and we're immediately going into a school tour and then interviewing. So we want to make sure that you eat prior to arriving. I do ask that you make us aware of any food allergies or food restrictions that you do have so we can make sure that we're accommodating you while we're on site. And then just a quick reminder that if you haven't already sent us your vendor forms, please make sure you do that ASAP. That's what allows us to pay you and reimburse you these expenses. So what are we looking at once we're on site? So as I mentioned beforehand, the school's been going through that year-long self-reflective process, and each individual program has been completing self-studies. And then in addition to that, they've been working as kind of a team to look at these 7 overarching standards as well and complete the self-studies associated with them. So within that, these are really areas of focus that kind of touch the entire school. So school climate and affirmative action, for example, is really looking at the overall school environment. How do folks get along within that environment? How do they navigate through that environment? Do students feel safe and supported within that environment, for example? So those are just some of the questions that we would be looking at and asking within that subject area. Leadership and yearly goals, student services, facilities, standards and assessment, community and school relations, and then staff development are the other 6 overarching standards that we do look at. Now, typically, it's our internal Maine DOE team members that are really evaluating these specific areas because we oftentimes, and we do have specific specialties or expertise within these subject areas. So we do tend to be the ones that are focusing in on that, and then it would be you folks that are really looking at the programs. So beyond the overarching standards, we're also looking at each individual program that is currently operational at the CTE. And within that review process, we're really looking at some consistent themes and some consistent subject areas within that programming. So first off, we're looking at the overall structure. So how many sessions are being offered? How often are they offered? What is the standard or typical enrollment that they see from year to year? What are the overall goals of the program, for example? What type of instructor credentials does the instructor bring to the table? What's the overall program composition, or what is the standards and assessments being utilized within that programming? What kind of curriculum and instruction, or what are the curriculum and instruction methods being utilized in order to provide information to students and to support that learning? What does the classroom, the physical classroom and lab space look like? What types of equipment is being utilized? Is it new equipment? Is it updated? Or is the classroom and lab space large enough to accommodate all of the students that are attending currently? What's that program advisory committee makeup? So do they have the PAC membership that is required by the state? How often are PAC meetings being held? And then what types of things are they discussing within those PAC meetings? Student organizations and community involvement is also a key element. So how are they communicating beyond the walls of the school? So to sending schools to community, to industry. So one thing that I do try and do is assign at least one program that each instructor or each team member is comfortable with, where that really meets the expertise. So whether you are a career exploration instructor, an automotive instructor, or a student services coordinator, I try and make sure that I'm aligning your interest and your expertise with at least one program that I'm assigning you. And then there's one additional. So everybody gets two programs. There's one additional program that you will also be assigned to. And although that may not necessarily be a subject area that you have as much familiarity with, because the structures that we're looking at, because the topics that we're addressing within those program reviews are pretty consistent, you should still be comfortable in having that conversation during the interview process and things along that lines. So what evidence are we looking at as we're reviewing our assigned sections? So it's important to acknowledge that the school sends the evidence that they feel backs up the information provided on the self-study. I do not specifically identify what that evidence has to be. So it's really up to them to decide what they are sending us. However, it is important that we kind of have an understanding of what we might be looking for within that process, so that if we're not seeing what we need, we can ultimately request it. I'm going to share with you the rubric in just a moment, which does provide some suggestions and kind of outlines some of the subject areas we might be looking at, but I do want to also give you a few examples. So for example, one of the things we are consistently looking at is that PAC membership and that PAC meeting structure or framework. So we might ask ourselves, is the program's PAC effective and structured correctly? And a few pieces of evidence that we might be looking at in order to kind of determine whether or not it is we might look at dated meeting minutes with attendee lists. We might ask for a copy of their Common Yearly Evaluation Tool, or CYET. They might also just give us a list of all of the PAC members that are associated with them, along with their titles, so that we know how to categorize each of those PAC members to ensure that they're meeting the requirements of the state. For curriculum delivery and alignment of standards, example evidence that you might be looking for might include sample portfolios or samples of student projects. You might look at samples of lesson plans. Now, within that, I would never encourage an instructor to send their entire curriculum to you. That would be too cumbersome, but they can send you examples. And so maybe they send you 1, 2, or 3 lesson plans for you to take a look at, and then you can take a look at how is that lesson plan being aligned to the standards? What standards are the students getting by completing that lesson? If we're looking at those overarching standards and staff development in particular, we might look at examples of professional development that some of their instructors have attended or that was being offered on a school-wide basis. We might look at an agenda for a tech update group that was attended or a conference that was attended. We might also look at what is their annual review process for each instructor. So there's quite a bit of evidence that could potentially be offered and as I said, sent by the school. If you don't receive what you need to really back up the information being provided on the self-assessment, you are more than welcome to request that during that interview process. So don't feel as though you are confined to what you've already received. You can do that discovery process and ask for what you're needed within the process. So this is the program rubric I just mentioned, and this is just a really great tool or resource to help guide you within that interview process and within that program review process. And what this does is it just kind of highlights those key focus areas that you might be considering as you're moving through that review process. So program overview, classroom lab space and equipment, standards and assessment and outcomes, curriculum delivery, instructor credential, and then student organization and community engagement. And each program really does have these elements within it. So it allows us to kind of be a little consistent within our reviewing as we're moving through the process as individuals and as a team. That center 2 columns really highlight within those big focus areas what are kind of those subcategories that we might be considering. So if you're looking at program overview, you might consider scheduling structure, student enrollment, the program goals, classroom climate, things along that lines. And then that far left column, really looks at kind of sample evidence that you might consider or you might be looking for as you're going through that discovery process. Now, I also want to highlight in that first focus area box, that we identify the self-study questions that specific focus area pertains to. So it's very easy to cross-reference between the self-study and this document. So I want to talk a little bit about the steps in the process that we as reviewers are going to be taking. So step 1 is really that desk audit process. And I'll be honest and straightforward in saying that this is primarily that Maine DOE team, that internal team that is doing this desk audit process. I do not ask folks that are coming from other sending schools to do the desk audit because we start it prior to arriving on site a few weeks prior to. And I just know that y'all are busy people, so I only want you to be focusing on the CSR when you're physically present and with us. So that said, up to this point, we've already received the self-studies and the evidence. So that desk audit process really kind of initiates the review of those materials. And again, because our internal team is focusing on those standards and assessments, oftentimes the desk audit is really focusing on those higher level big picture standards and assessments. Again, it's an opportunity for us to kind of review the materials, review the documents, and then provide feedback to the director and request additional information if it's needed. and preemptively just kind of begin that conversation with the director as far as what we might be looking for once we get on site. So step 2 within the review process is in fact that on-site review, which is where you folks join us. And there's a few things going on throughout the 3 days that we're there. So I want to kind of give you a sense of what that 3 days is going to look like. So first off, when you arrive, I'm going to be providing you a thumb drive, and that really is going to include all of the documentation that you're going to need in order to be successful throughout the 3 days. It includes self-studies, all supplemental evidence that has been provided to us. It also is going to have all of those forms such as the writing template. It's going to include your expense sheets, the team assignments document, and scheduling, etc. So really all of the meat of what you're going to need throughout the 3 days, that's where you're going to go to. The discovery process is an important piece to the puzzle. That's your primary function once you're on site. And this really includes interviews, it includes observation, and it includes kind of follow up on that evidence. So those interviews, what I do is schedule 50-minute interviews for each of the assigned areas. So you'll have that opportunity to really sit down and have the one-to-one focused conversation with the instructor for a program or with an administrator, for example, for those overarching standards. I do one interview per program, and that is with the instructor. And then with those overarching standards, I always schedule at least 2 interviews to connect with 2 different individuals on the staff. Beyond those interviews, the discovery process doesn't end there. You're always welcome to go and sit in observation of the classroom if you'd like to. Again, you're always welcome to go and follow up on evidence, or if, for example, throughout the conversation of us group sharing, you find you forgot to ask a question, you're more than welcome to go back and reconnect with that instructor in order to follow up on questions. So the overall discovery process does not end with the interview, and it's really important that we acknowledge that and know that you can do what you need to do in order to get the information you need. There's also a review of the facilities and equipment going on, and that is one of our internal team members tends to wander around the school. You'll see him in his tool belt and really looking for safety. He's kind of looking at OSHA standards and safety standards, looking at equipment for relevance. Are they updated? Are they industry specific, etc.? So just know that that's also happening. And will be reflected in those team deliberations. The team deliberation is really that group share. So the first 2 days that we are there is very much interview heavy, and we're going to be looking at a sample schedule in just a moment, but it is very much interview heavy. And then the second day, kind of the last few hours of that second day, is when we begin our group share process. And that's when each of us has the opportunity to kind of share what we've discovered, what our experience has been, and kind of look at what our findings are and have that conversation. So that begins, as I said, on that second day. And then that third day, we don't do any interviewing, and all we're doing is we're doing that team deliberation and that group share. And then that final step is really looking at the final determinations on the accommodations and recommendations. And what I do like to put out there is this is never an I gotcha kind of moment. We're not there to do harm to the school. We're there as partners of the school to help them kind of grow and improve within the processes that they're doing. So we always want to make sure that we're highlighting those things that they're already doing really, really, really well. So those are what the commendations are. There's no specific amount of commendations or recommendations you have to do. It's just appropriate for what your findings are. And then the recommendations is, okay, where are those areas of improvement? Where can they potentially push themselves a little bit further? So again, not to do harm, but it is there as a partner. How can we help you move forward? So this is a sample of the program self-study that you're going to see for each of the program areas. And I do encourage folks to use this within the interview in order to kind of help guide that conversation. So as you can see down below, there's specific questions that are being asked. And that middle column is where that CTE responds to those questions. So that's where they're giving us the information, they're setting us for the evidence, letting us know where we can find the evidence, incorporating links, etc. And then over to the right-hand side is the Maine DOE notes. So this is where you can bring this with you into the interview and literally take notes as you're having those conversations. One thing that I do tend to do is I review this document prior to going into the interviews. I highlight the areas where I really want to make sure that I hit upon. So maybe, for example, the evidence that provided just didn't quite provide all the information that I needed, or what have you. And that's, I highlight those particular areas to make sure that I ask those questions. Sometimes I'll even jot down questions prior to the interview. That way I make sure that I hit them once I'm in the interview. So this can be a really helpful document, not only within that evidence and discovery period, but also within the interview structure as you're having the conversations. So this is a sample day one schedule, and I like to make sure that you have an understanding of what day one looks like, because it does tend to be a little fast and furious and a little different from the other days. So first off, I want to start by making sure you have an understanding of where you can find the CSR schedule for your specific review. And at this point in the conversation, I have typically already sent you the team assignments document in one of the emails you've received from me. So you can go back and review that document. And the first tab, it's an Excel spreadsheet. The first tab is the team assignments. So it lists off all the team members, know where they're coming from, what their specialty or where their focus is. And then also it provides the specific assignments for everybody on the team. The second tab of that document is the drafted schedule. And it is a draft at this point. Typically at this point in the conversation, I am working with the school to finalize that schedule. So it is mostly going to be the same, but there might be some tweaks in timing and things along that lines to ensure the schedule works for everybody. So back to the day one sample that we have in front of us. So as I had mentioned beforehand, day one is a travel day. So we don't start until about 11:30. That's so that we give you at least a minimum of about 4 hours to be able to travel to the location. Now, if anybody takes longer than 4 hours to get there, there are some folks that geographically, that 4 hours is just not going to work for you. If that's the case, then please let me know, and I can always get you a hotel room for the night beforehand to ensure you're able to be there at 11:30 without having to wake up too early and be on the road. So again, once we arrive at 11:30, I'm going to give you kind of a 10-minute window to get settled and get yourself kind of in a space where you're ready to do the school tour. The director will then take us around the school and we'll tour the facilities and see each of the programs and get a sense as to where we're going to be doing our interviews throughout the school. And then we come back to our group space and we do the team huddle. And that's an opportunity for me to provide you all the documents that you're going to need, including that thumb drive I already talked about earlier. And then also do introductions and just kind of welcome everybody and get to know everybody a little bit once we're there. After that, we start in fast and furious with those interviews. And I will be honest, I tend to front load those interviews with our Maine DOE team, internal team members. And that's so that it gives you folks time that are coming from other schools an opportunity to kind of sit down with the materials and familiarize yourself with them. Where we've already had that opportunity and done that desk audit, it's very easy for us to be able to slide into those interviews. So I want to make sure you have a little bit of a buffer to be able to kind of set yourself up for the interviews. Each of us will do at least one interview on day one, so you will start that interview process then. Around 4 o'clock, we do depart for the hotel and give you time to be able to check into that hotel space. Now, part of our review process is we always offer the school an opportunity to kind of sit down to dinner with us and really connect on more of a casual basis. Typically, this is at a local pub. The CTE identifies the space and makes a reservation. You do not have to join us if you don't want to. I'll be honest, I tend to really enjoy the dinner because it does give me an opportunity to connect with people on a different level and on a more casual level. But this is not a requirement. So if you want to join us, you're welcome to. If you don't, that's perfectly fine. There's no judgment. That's quite all right. We also put it out in the same way to the full school staff. So again, anybody that wants to join us from the school can, but it's not a requirement. Now within the dinner, it's set up a little bit different because you folks are on that per diem rate, and we want to make sure that this is a reimbursable expense that we are paying for. You do have to cover the expense of the dinner up front, but again, recognizing that that is something that you can expense back. So step 3 in the review process is the report writing. So at this point, you've already done all of that discovery, you've done the interviews, you have a solid sense as to what's happening within each of the programs and what those commendations and recommendations are going to be. Now we just need to get it into black and white and written format. So one of the things I like to just kind of initiate and start out is that this is intended to be a draft. So you need to know that although I'm asking you to kind of give me that drafted section and to write that drafted section, at the same time recognize that on the other end of this, I am going to be doing a lot of massaging of that writing to ensure that it sounds like one voice within that final report. So I don't expect perfection. I don't expect that the sentence structure is going to be 100%. Please recognize that that's not what's important here. What's important is that we have all the content that we need within the report. So use that program report template. So I have created a program report template to help kind of guide you within that writing process. And we're going to take a look at the first page of that in just a moment, but that is going to be included within the thumb drive. And I may have even included it in one of the emails that you have received as well. So know that that's going to be available to you to help within this process. That said, there are still some formatting considerations that I do want you to take as you're writing. So first off, I do ask that you use 11-point Arial font and that it is in paragraph format. And that's just to help me within that writing process on the other end, because that is the format that I will be using. It's also really important that as you're writing, you're doing it from the perspective of the visiting team. I don't want any one person to take ownership of any particular section. So as you're writing recommendations, that's not your specific recommendations, that's the visiting team's recommendations. So it's important that we format the writing in this kind of using this kind of practice. Similarly, we want to make sure that we're not specifying names of individuals or using personal pronouns within the writing process. So as far as the pronouns go, we want to try and maintain a gender neutral approach to our writing. Now, I know that that can be really difficult for some, and so recognize that, you know, this is something that I've been doing for a long time. It's kind of second nature to me. So if you miss a he or a his or a hers, within the report, I will catch it and I will be able to transition it to gender neutral. But it is helpful if you try and at least remain gender neutral. In addition, again, making sure that we're not specifying names of individuals, because the individual may not be the same individual come that mid-cycle review. So for example, oftentimes the full cycle review, it might be one instructor, but come mid-cycle, it's a different instructor. And that new instructor within that mid-cycle process is still going to be accountable for all of the recommendations in this review. So we want to make sure that we're not placing ownership on one specific individual and instead keeping it as neutral as possible so that anybody within that position can take that ownership. So as the final piece of the formatting puzzle, I want to make sure that we're considering how we're treating acronyms. So it's important that we acknowledge that not all of the final readers of these reports or the audience that is going to be reading these reports, they're not necessarily CTE specific individuals, which means they might not necessarily understand our industry specific acronyms. So to make sure that we're being clear as to what that acronym means, it's important that we initially, the first time that we see it within the report, that we are spelling it out. And then utilizing parentheses to identify what the acronym is, and then moving forward every time that that particular either object or organization comes up, then you can use that acronym. So as an example, unless you have lived and breathed CTE, you may not necessarily know what a PAC is. So if we just begin writing and identifying PACs, people might be left wondering, what does that mean? So we need to initially say Program Advisory Committee, spell it out, parenthesize it, PAC, and then moving forward, those individuals that are reviewing that report will understand what our intention is. So a couple follow-up notes. Be sure that you're consulting with your team members. It's really important that you recognize that this is not an isolated process. We're working as a team for a reason, and there's a lot of experts within the room, including yourself. So ask questions, talk to folks, get opinions of others if you get stuck. Utilize the people that are sitting next to you within that team. That's a part of the process, and it's a kind of an important piece of that puzzle. And then finally, there are 3 items that I need to make sure that I'm getting from you before we leave the site. So first off, I want to make sure I get that final draft of your report template. I also want to make sure that I get the expense sheet from you, which we will at some point be sitting down throughout those 3 days and working those through together. And then also I want to make sure that I get that pen drive back from you. Those are something that we recycle, we reuse on a consistent basis. So I do want to make sure you're not leaving with that in your hand. So this is the program report template that you're going to utilize to really help prompt that writing process for you. And ultimately, all the writing that you do is going to go into this report. And this is what you're going to send me in order for me to later on place it within that final draft format. So the program report template just starts out asking for your name, the CTE that's been reviewed, and then the program. And then it goes section by section and topic by topic that we ask that you kind of consider as you're doing these program reviews. And we've kind of already talked about what those topics are and what those big picture items are. So it starts, for example, in section 1 with a program description. So this is really the introduction to the program. This is where you talk about what the program's goals are, what is the intended outcomes, how many sections are being offered and how often, what does enrollment look like for the program. And this will typically be about a paragraph in length. And you place that paragraph within where you see that your response. There's an empty box underneath each of the sections where you're going to be writing in your response and drafting up that report. Now, the questions you'll see underneath that program description header are just intended to help kind of get you thinking. It's to help prompt your thinking. So you might ask yourself, how is your program structured? What are the goals of the program, for example? And if you go down all the way to 7, that last question, you're going to see that it specifically directs you to the questions that are associated with this section within the self-study. So again, this is a very cross-reference, easily cross-referenced document. So that you can kind of navigate between both documents and kind of help to develop the writing in that way. Again, gives you an example of how you might kind of articulate that particular setting, and then it goes down from section to section in that same kind of a format. So this is just to help guide your writing, as I said. You don't have to answer every single one of those questions that's being identified there. They're just simply prompts. But this is what you will ultimately be sending me on the final day. Thank you for taking the time to review this presentation. I am super excited to have you join us on a comprehensive school review team. I hope that you find the experience worthwhile and that you get everything that I know that you can from the experience. Between now and then, if you have any questions or concerns, my contact information is right there. Feel free to reach out at any point. I look forward to seeing you soon.